started. Welcome to the 2025 Sustainable Energy Program orientation session. Before we get started, I do want to thank each and every one of you for participating in our program and for partnering with us. We truly could not do this without you. So I just can't express um, how much we appreciate your participation. And for those of you that don't know me, my name is Jessica Kneifel. I have been with LES for about 5 years now, but I've only been part of this program for about a year and a half. So going into our agenda for today, we're going to start out with some general information. So just some housekeeping items, and then we'll jump into our each one of our programs, and then we'll finish with a recap of changes. And then if you guys have any questions, we'll try and answer those. One thing I do want to note is if you guys have any questions as I'm talking, don't hesitate to pop those in the chat and I'll try and answer them as I go. Or if you want to save them for the end, that works as well. Just something to keep in mind as I'm going through these slides. If you see something in orange, that means it's a change for 2025. So maybe that is something that you just want to pay special attention to. Going into our general information. So the first thing, to be a trade ally for 2025, we do require at least one individual from your organization attend an orientation session. So you guys are meeting that requirement today. If you haven't done so already, please make sure that you send a W-9 form to sep@les.com. It does have to have a current date on it. Something that is a new requirement this year. So for our HVAC, plumbing, or installation contractors, we are asking that you complete a questionnaire to gain access to our programs for 2025. It only takes about 5 minutes to complete. But something to note is before you jump into it, making sure that you have your business license number, because that is a question that we will be asking on the questionnaire. And the last thing to note on this slide is, as always, we always offer one-on-one portal training or a system user guide. So either of those are available upon request. Going into our key changes for 2025. So for all programs, if contractors, if you are listing the LES incentive on your quotes, something that we're asking is that a disclaimer be placed on it, such as pending LES approval, just something that tells the customer that this has not yet been reviewed or approved by LES. For our high efficiency heat pump water heater program, so historically, we've always requested that all projects go through pre-authorization. For 2 of our programs, we are offering the option to basically bypass pre-authorization this year. So for our heat pump water heater program, if the incentive is less than 5,000 and you choose not to pre-authorize the project, it does have to be submitted within 90 days of the invoice date. Something to keep in mind though, we still are highly recommending that you always go through pre-authorization, but if you choose not to, technically you could submit it to us after the fact for 2025. Key changes for our whole house ceiling and insulation program. So LES will incentivize attic insulation regardless of if the homeowner chooses to insulate their walls. So previously we had certain requirements that customers would only qualify for an attic insulation incentive if they chose to insulate their walls. That requirement for 2025 is no longer with us. So attic insulation, assuming our energy requirements are met, will automatically qualify in 2025. The other thing to note for our whole house ceiling and insulation program, we are requiring pre and post installation photos for attic insulation incentives specifically. For our high efficiency heat pump and air conditioner program, this is another program that we are no longer requiring pre-authorization for projects resulting in incentives less than 5,000. Contractors, if you are choosing to forgo pre-authorization, they do have to be submitted to us within 90 days of the invoice date. So if you're, submitting something 95 days after the invoice date, that would no longer qualify for an LES incentive. The other main change that we want to note for the 2025 heat pump and air conditioner program is that inverter-driven / variable capacity equipment will automatically qualify. So as long as you can provide documentation to us that says, this is inverter driven or variable capacity, LES will approve it regardless of those ER2, SEER2 minimums. So if you have something that has a SEER2 of 18, but only an ER2 of 10, that would qualify as long as you can provide that documentation. The last thing to note for our commercial and industrial energy efficiency program, we do have several new prescriptive incentives that we're offering, and I'll go more into detail a little bit later. Going into our general process, so our sustainable energy program is the overall program that we have. But below that program, we have 4 sub-programs. So we have our heat pump water heater program, our high efficiency heat pump and air conditioner program, our whole house ceiling and insulation program, and our commercial and industrial energy efficiency program. So again, this chart is just highlighting that for these 2 programs over here, you can choose to forgo pre-authorization, but if you do so, they do have to be submitted within 90 days of the invoice date. For these 2 programs over here, again, we are still requiring pre-authorization to qualify. Keeping that in mind, I do want to stress that we still are always encouraging pre-authorization. Pre-authorization, the benefits are LES reserves funds. So each year we have a limited pot of money. So pre-authorizing makes sure that LES still has funds available. And number 2, it gives the contractor the ability to just double check that what they're proposing to the customer qualifies and meets those energy requirements. This is our general process for when projects are pre-authorized before installation. So again, that main benefit is that funds are reserved once LES pre-authorizes a project, and this does have to occur before installation. From that pre-authorization date that LES says, yep, this looks good to go, existing residential, you have 90 days to complete the install, and for commercial or new construction residential, you have 180 days to complete the install. We do recognize that sometimes, timeline shift or equipment doesn't arrive on time. And so if you need additional time, we do offer the ability to grant you an extension as long as you indicate why you need an extension. The last thing I want you to keep in mind is that, as always, LES does not issue reimbursement until the project is complete. So once you have completed your project, that is the point at which you should be requesting reimbursement. And then just as a reminder, incentives cannot exceed 50% of costs directly associated with equipment, material, and contractor labor for purchase and installation of qualifying measures. This is the general process flow for when projects are not pre-authorized. So again, this is not available for our commercial and industrial energy efficiency program or our whole house ceiling and insulation program. But if you are installing a heat pump and you choose to, submit it to LES after the fact, basically the contractor decides to forgo pre-authorization, you complete your installation, and then as long as reimbursement is submitted within 90 days of the invoice date, LES will accept that. Just a final reminder, that 50% rule is also applicable for projects that are not pre-authorized. Going into our heat pump water heater program. So the incentive for heat pump water heaters for 2025, this remains unchanged, so it's still $500. Keep in mind that residential or commercial can still qualify. And again, this is a program that you can either choose to get it pre-authorized before installation or get it submitted within 90 days of the invoice date, assuming that the incentive is less than $5,000. Documentation requirements for this program. So we are still requiring a plumbing permit. We still require an AHRI sheet be attached to the project. And then as a reminder, contractors, if you are providing the LES incentive listed on the quote, just making sure that you're adding that disclaimer that says pending LES approval. And then as always as well, we do request that you are placing the model numbers and the LES incentive on the quote so that we can verify that the customer is in fact receiving the money, or on the invoice, sorry, not quote. And then this right here is just a screenshot of our system. So if you go to submit a project and you choose not to go through pre-authorization, just something to keep in mind, we did add this field where it says, do you want to bypass pre-authorization and request reimbursement? If you want to request reimbursement right away, you would just make sure to select yes, and then making sure that you're also attaching the invoice to the project at this point. Going into our 2025 whole house ceiling and insulation program. So this is the incentives chart. Again, we simplified this chart, and so attic insulation will automatically qualify, assuming that the existing insulation is 6 inches or less, and the new insulation being added is R49 or greater. And then our exterior wall insulation incentive will qualify as long as there's no wall insulation present and you are adding insulation of R13 or greater. Going into our reminders for our whole house ceiling and insulation program. So this is applicable to either residential or commercial projects. Please keep in mind that this program, we are still requiring pre-authorization for any project to qualify. All qualifying homes also require a pre and post blower door test. The maximum incentive is still $1,500. And then just to summarize, LES will incentivize attic insulation regardless of if the homeowner chooses to insulate their walls. Documentation requirements for our whole house ceiling and insulation program. Just as another reminder, if you're listing that LES incentive on your quote, making sure that you add that disclaimer that says pending LES approval. For a wall insulation incentive, we are requiring for 2025 that the contractor provides basically a calculation that shows us how you determine that wall square footage. The calculation does have to assume a 15% deduction for doors and windows. And then if you are doing an insulation incentive, we are requiring pre and post insulation photos. In both instances, for those installation photos specifically, we do need kind of an overview picture of the attic, and then we also need one that shows a tape measure to kind of give us an idea of the existing depth of attic insulation. And then, as always, the invoice from our insulation contractors should include the LES incentive being deducted from the total cost. And then we are requiring those blower door test results be provided. Going into our 2025 high efficiency heat pump and air conditioner program. So something to keep in mind as I go through this is it is applicable to both residential and commercial systems, but the key thing to keep in mind is this is for smaller systems only, so 5.4 tons or less. This is an overview of the incentives. So the main thing that has changed here is that the inverter-driven equipment will automatically qualify, and this is applicable for both the LES and the city incentives. So just something to keep in mind there. Regarding the reminders, just making sure that you place a disclaimer on your quotes saying that that the incentive is pending LES approval. We also are giving the option to bypass pre-authorization for this year for 2025. So if you decide to bypass pre-authorization, just making sure that it is submitted within 90 days of the invoice date. And then another thing that I want to point out is that LES is still requiring EAR 2/Tier 2 ratings. So if you have a piece of equipment that might be a little bit older and only has EAR and SEER ratings, that will not qualify for our incentives. And then this down here is just a screenshot of our system. So if you decide to bypass that pre-authorization, you would just select yes. And that indicates to LES that, hey, I want to request reimbursement right away. And then I guess as a final reminder, our incentives for this program are available to new construction or existing houses. This is a recap on city incentives. So this is what's currently in place as of October 1st, and this will not change for 2025. So heat pumps replacing an air conditioner will still receive that higher incentive. Just a recap on who is eligible. So the resident does have to live within the city of Lincoln, and it can either be a single family detached home, or if it's a row home, townhome, condo, or duplex, the it does have to be owner occupied. It can't be a renter living in those units. What is eligible is either an air source heat pump or a mini split heat pump. Um, Something to keep in mind for the city incentives specifically, it does have to replace an existing system. That existing system can be a window AC, but as long as that existing system is at least 5 years old, that would qualify for an incentive. And the last thing to keep in mind is the city does have the same energy requirements as LES, so it either has to have those SEER2/ER2 minimums, or if it is inverter driven, that will also qualify starting January 1st. What is not eligible? So the key thing that I want to point out here is that for the city incentives specifically, um, more than one heat pump per household cannot qualify for an LES incentive. So if you are an HVAC contractor and you are installing two systems, you could potentially get two incentives from LES, but you would only the customer would only qualify for one city incentive. And then again, just to highlight, installation of a new heat pump without replacement of an older system also does not qualify. So if you're just adding a new system rather than replacing, again, that would not qualify. Going into a recap on city incentives. So general population incentives, the contractor will just apply through the LES portal, and then we will distribute both the LES and city funds to you. If you have a customer that you think is interested in the low to moderate income incentives, the customer will need to reach out to urban development at this email right here to apply for that grant money. And once they are approved by urban development will essentially contact you and say, hey, your customer qualifies for a $3,000 incentive from the city. And from there, you are good to install the system. You will need to make sure that you still apply for the $800 LES incentive through the portal. Just a overview of residential geothermal systems. So this chart has not changed, so I won't go too much into it. Everything on this chart is the same as 2024. For commercial heat pump and air conditioner incentives, this mimics the residential incentives. And again, we will automatically let inverter-driven equipment qualify. Going into our reminders for the heat pumps and air conditioners, for systems less than 5.4 tons, again, you can either pre-authorize the project or submit it after the fact as long as it's within 90 days of the invoice date, and assuming the incentive is less than 5,000. HVAC contractors, if you have a commercial system that is greater than 5.4 tons, you do need to make sure that we get that submitted under our commercial and industrial energy efficiency program. And your first step for getting those submitted is actually to email us at sep@les.com, and we will actually submit that in the portal for you. And then the same ER2/SEER2 ratings are required. So if you have equipment that is only ER and SEER rated, that would not qualify for an LES incentive. And then this is also available to new construction or existing buildings. Going into our documentation requirements for this program. So again, if you are listing the LES incentives on your quotes, just making sure that you add that disclaimer that says pending LES approval or something along those lines. We are still requiring a mechanical permit. Something that's changed slightly is AHRI certificates. As you guys know, we've always required those in a sense. We no longer will have our AHRI lookup for 2025. So what you'll do for 2025 is you'll type in that reference number into this field, and then we also have a slot for you guys to essentially attach those files directly to the project. And then for the inverter driven equipment, again, if you have something that is inverter driven, but maybe it only has an ear two of, let's say 10, so it doesn't meet our ear two minimums. To make sure that our system allows you to bypass those minimums, we do need to make sure that you're checking this box right here. This box basically tells our system that, hey, this has been identified as inverter driven. It doesn't need to meet those year 2/year 2 minimums. And then as a final reminder, as always, the invoice should show all model numbers and the LAS incentive being deducted from the total cost. For our 2025 Commercial and Industrial Energy Efficiency Program, so this is a program that, again, we do require pre-authorization before installation under this program. The first step for any projects under this program is to reach out to sep@les.com. Depending on what the project is, the requested documentation will vary. But once we've received that documentation, we've determined that it qualifies. Basically, LES will pre-authorize that in our system, and from that day, funds are reserved for 180 days. If for some reason, again, you need additional time, extensions can be granted at the discretion of LES staff. And then as a reminder, all equipment must be operational and final invoices provided before reimbursement is issued. Going into our incentives for commercial geothermal/water source heat pumps. So something that's new on this chart is previously LES did not offer incentives for replacement of geothermal heat pumps/water source heat pumps. And we are letting this qualify in 2025. So this section down here is actually new, but it does mimic closely to our residential incentives. For our commercial systems greater than 5.4 tons, as a standard, the incentives for the most part in large will be $100 per ton. So if you have, a 20-ton system, that incentive would be $2,000. So we did make this prescriptive this year. Just some reminders for these incentives. If you have something that is less than 5.4 tons, that can be submitted under high efficiency heat pump and air conditioner program. But the larger systems, you need to be reaching out to this SEP@les.com. And for these projects specifically, we will ask that they be AHR rated and that we also have a mechanical permit. For our energy management system/motion sensor incentives, so the incentive will be the lesser of the following. So 20% of the new system cost, 50 cents per square feet of floor space being served by the new system, or it caps out at 50,000. Something to keep in mind for motion sensors that are directly embedded in the light fixture. Lighting contractors or just contractors in general, if you do have where the control is directly in the fixture, the incentive will be $10 per fixture. And we would not provide an incentive for the labor associated with installing the lighting fixture. And this is really the only lighting incentive that we would have for 2025 is if it has some sort of motion control feature. Guidelines specific to energy management systems. So this incentive is not available to new construction buildings, and the building does have to be at least 5 years old. The other thing to keep in mind for energy management systems or motion sensors is that expanding or optimizing an existing system can qualify, but replacing an existing system or individual controls does not. So essentially what this means is As long as LES can justify that an improvement is being made, we would honor an incentive. If you're just doing a repair, so you're just replacing something, you're fixing something, and no true improvement is being made, that would not qualify for an incentive. Incentives for compressed air systems. So we have several prescriptive ones for variable compressors. One that we added new this year is cycling refrigerated air dryers, which is going to be $2 per SCFM. And then we do add the option for other compressed air system incentives, such as fixing leaks, but those are going to be calculated on a case-by-case basis. And something to keep in mind is these incentives are available for both new construction and existing buildings. The main thing with air compressors is that they do have to be variable speed, replacing fixed speed to qualify. For variable frequency drives, our incentive is $50 per horsepower being controlled. The main thing to keep in mind here is VFDs replacing existing VFDs do not qualify. But if you have a new construction building and you are installing several VFDs, that would qualify for an incentive. Going into our Energy Star steam cookers, dishwashers, or combination oven incentives. So this is new for 2025, and that incentive will be $800 per piece of equipment. And for any of these incentives, they do have to have an Energy Star rating. So just when you're looking at the specifications, if you're seeing that Energy Star emblem, that means that it would likely qualify for our program. For any qualifying steam cookers, dishwashers, or combination ovens, something to keep in mind as well is they do have to be electric. So if it's gas instead of electric, unfortunately, LES would not honor an incentive for that. To be eligible for the dishwasher incentive specifically, we are also asking that the building hot water fuel type be electric, and if you have a booster water heater, that the fuel type is also electric. One other thing to keep in mind with the dishwasher incentive is if you had like a smaller, like under counter dishwasher, that would not qualify for an incentive. But these are available to new construction or existing buildings. Refrigeration systems. So this incentive is calculated on a case-by-case basis. Just some examples that we include would be if you're adding a refrigeration monitoring system, or if you have multi-deck cases that are retrofitted with solid glass doors. Those are just some examples. It's not limited to that, but that's just to kind of give you some ideas. And this is available to both new construction and existing buildings. Custom incentives. So we have this bucket that we basically leave open. We realize that our prescriptive incentives only cover a small portion of energy efficiency projects. So if you are doing a project that you think will result in energy savings or demand reduction, but you don't think it necessarily fits into one of LES's buckets, don't hesitate to reach out to us. It still could potentially qualify for an incentive. It would be calculated on a more case-by-case basis. The main thing to keep in mind here is that in large, we do have to receive proof that the project will result in significant energy savings and demand reduction. Just as a recap of changes for 2025. So again, making sure that contractors, if you're listing the LES incentive on the quote, that you are listing a disclaimer that says pending LES approval. For the high efficiency heat pump water heater program, again, pre-authorization is no longer required for incentives less than 5,000. Just making sure that if you are forgoing that pre-authorization, that it's submitted within 90 days of the invoice date. For the whole house ceiling and insulation program, the key changes are LES will incentivize attic insulation regardless of if the homeowner chooses to insulate their walls. And then we are also requiring pre and post insulation photos for attic insulation incentives. for our heat pump and air conditioner program. And this is also a program that we are no longer requiring pre-authorization as long as the incentive is less than 5,000. Projects, again, do have to be submitted within 90 days of the invoice date if it's not pre-authorized before that installation. And the other requirement or the other change that we have is if you can prove to us that the equipment is inverter driven or variable capacity, we will automatically let that equipment qualify, even if it only has an year 2 of 10 as opposed to 12. And then the final changes for the commercial and industrial energy efficiency program is LES did add several new prescriptive incentives. This is the contact information for myself as well as Jay Stoa, who is my counterpart for the program. The main thing to keep in mind is this SEP at LES inbox is actually a joint inbox. So if for some reason Jay or I are out at the office, the other person will see it. So this is a good point of contact. And then I do want to open the floor for any questions. I do want to add that this presentation will be sent out. So don't worry about, having everything memorized. This will be sent out shortly afterwards, as well as the questionnaire link. Is there any questions? You can either type them in the chat or Mark or Jay, do you have anything that you want to add?
I would just say if you do have any questions regarding any of the program, or if you have a customer that just doesn't quite understand what the incentive is or how it works, that they can even contact us. And we're going to work with you guys on all of the projects and all of your requests. So don't ever hesitate to contact us. So, and thank you all for taking part in this orientation.
Okay, it doesn't look like we have any questions, so I will go ahead and give you guys back 27 minutes to your